Oh, we're becoming a broken record here. We are becoming a broken record by saying this, but once again, it was another very eventful week in the Donald Trump circus, the Donald Trump circus presidency, and what you might call it. But it sounds like a broken record saying that, but that's the case every week, and there's never, ever, ever a dull moment, and this week is no exception. And we've got the height of the hysteria. I don't know. I mean, I say right now, I don't think like the hysteria over Russia and Putin could get any higher than it is right now, but I'm sure it will. And we'll be back here in a couple of weeks talking about how the the left side of the establishment has reached a new low in terms of their fear mongering over Putin and playing games with nuclear powers and everything and getting them riled up and inciting tensions. But this week was pretty significant with that regard. We've seen a lot of escalation of like the anti-Russia, anti-Putin hysteria, which, as we've talked about, actually deflects from some very real likely criminality and likely criminal connections of the Trump administration to Russian mafia interests. However, the Russian mafia interests, some people might call it the Russian Jewish Zionist mafia, probably may have something to do with Putin at a certain level, but it's certainly not with this narrative that Putin actually influenced our elections and helped Donald Trump get elected. But in addition to all the hysteria about that, we're seeing the pro-Trump side, people like Alex Jones and others, are really pushing the this narrative that man named Seth Rich, who was the alleged leaker of the information, the DNC documents proving that about the primaries and the stealing of the primaries from Bernie Sanders, as well as a lot of other criminal activities of Hillary Clinton and her aides like John Podesta, that this alleged leaker was killed, and that it may have been people within the DNC and closely associated with the Clintons who may have been behind this because he did drop dead just after this information was put out. And now the belief in the stories coming out and the belief amongst the alt-right portion of the DNC and the people close to the Clintons were responsible for this. You've found some interesting connections as far as some of the people associated with the investigation. And what do you know, and what do you find particularly interesting about the investigation into this?
There's clearly a lot of smoke here, and there's definitely some fire that's creating that smoke. But who set the fire is not. It's not yet clear. There's not many trustworthy actors involved in all of this. I'm not trusting the media who's covering it, from like NBC to CNN, and but I'm also not trusting the investigator that was supposedly representing the family of Seth Rich, but it turns out that he was hired. His name is Rod Wheeler. He's a Fox News contributor and a former DC homicide detective. And I found that he also has Department of Homeland Security history. And he was on the Bill O'Reilly show in
Sean Hannity.
Oh, Hannity. I thought he was at one point. I think he was on O'Reilly, actually.
Oh, he may have been in the past. I know he was on Hannity's show this week pushing the Seth Rich stuff. So.
Oh yes, I haven't seen that, but he was on his pedigree or his legacy of media contribution was on O'Reilly and talking about these pink wearing lesbian gangbangers that were coming to rape your daughter. So there's a little here with this guy, Rod Wheeler, and then it turns out that he was hired not directly by Seth Rich's family, who I would imagine would have only the desire and intention to get the bottom of who actually murdered their son and why, but was actually... Rod Wheeler was not only paid for, but then brought to Seth Rich's family by a Texas Republican businessman. So there's problems here in terms of the motives of all these different people. Do I trust the dismissals of the DNC? No fucking way. There were emails back in the day from Podesta talking about another whistleblower, I believe, of like, let's make an example, let's punish the whistleblower. And this is definitely not, political murder is definitely not outside the wheelhouse of the Clinton crime syndicate. But at the same time, if we're going to be, fair and honest about the nature of the relationship to the Clintons from elements of the right, that a lot of things that were probably that elements of the right and the Bush gang were most heavily involved with were put on to the Clintons at some levels. Even thinking about like Mena, Arkansas, and the cocaine CIA drug running into the heart of the country that then got spread around the country into the chocolate set cities of America. And of course, Bill Clinton was governor during the 80s, and when massive amounts of cocaine was being brought by people like Barry Seal into Arkansas and distributed. But at the same time, Bill Clinton was just a governor, and who was a vice president, a former CIA director, was George H.W. Bush. And it does look like Clinton is actually a made member of the Bush gang. So this is not really, in some level, a different. This is not really a different gang. It may be underlings vying for different positions. So that's an issue, and the Clintons definitely have a body count behind them. And I wouldn't. They are definitely very, very bad people, criminals of a major type, and this would not be outside of their wheelhouse, nor the DNC. But at the same time, we don't know exactly what is going on with WikiLeaks. Who is WikiLeaks actually representing? And WikiLeaks and these leaks were key to creating this intellectual context for Trump to become the president. And in terms of in finishing up in terms of the way that I'm analyzing some of this stuff, of what I'm learning, is in looking into this new election integrity commission that Trump has set up to investigate the alleged 3 million illegal votes of illegals around the country, as Trump and Chris Kobach would say. I found out that not only is this commission riddled with people who are very untrustworthy in terms of actually caring about voter integrity, such as Chris Kobach. I've confronted Chris Kobach multiple times here in Kansas about the evidence that there is actually election fraud, machine fraud going on here in Kansas. There is a Wichita State mathematician called Beth Clarkson, who has begun to move forward the analysis that previous investigators, Choquette was one of them back in 2012, did a very academically accurate paper about the signs of election fraud in the 2012 Republican primaries that showed that as voting precincts got larger, the tendency, and these lined up with very specific manufactured machines, went towards advantaging Mitt Romney and disadvantaging Ron Paul. So there's something going on here, and Chris Kobach has shown no interest. I've given his office this actual study a few months ago, so they have it. But Chris Kobach is more obsessed with this. What is really it's a specter. It's not a real. It's a boogeyman of voter fraud. Yes, the threat is potentially there. There's not much evidence that it really exists in any significant number. So what the left and the right of, let's say, the Democrats and the Republicans have a consensus to cover up is election fraud. As we've spoken about before, the Republicans will focus on the threat, the boogeyman threat of voter fraud, and then the Democrats will focus on the real and increasingly significant from people like Chris Kobach and his cross-check program of disenfranchising voters of color in larger numbers than other voters. They're agreed, that's voter suppression, but they're agreed on covering up this election fraud. And so in bringing this analysis to a close, what I discovered was that in a response, in a critical response to people who believe that the evidence points to the DNC instigating not only a rigging of a institutional or a social fashion, which has already been proven out by some of these leaks, and there's actually a lawsuit on the books right now, a class action lawsuit of DNC voters who are putting forth hard evidence that they were defrauded by the DNC and the leadership they were supposedly not to take a side of a candidate, but it was very clear from the internal emails that Debbie Wasserman Schultz was acting as a proponent of Hillary Clinton from the beginning and throughout the entire primaries.
This is the lawsuit that the good quote progressives at the Young Turks are busy attacking the plaintiffs.
Oh, I did not know that. That is very.
It's very they've been very negative in the coverage of of this DNC lawsuit, trying to dismiss it and downplay the significance of it.
Well, that's very interesting too, because then I think about that the class action, the people representing this class of litigants against the DNC. Are pointing out they're having almost an impossible time getting the press to cover the case in a fair manner, and so I think it's interesting that we're not even seeing the right-wing media cover it, whereas they should be. It's basically a lawsuit showing that the DNC was frauding its own voters. So there's something to this, that this Fox News, Homeland Security, Texas Republican-backed investigator is getting a lot of play across the board. And this actual class action lawsuit against the DNC that has hard evidence already in play of fraud is not getting any play. So there's something to that. But then the thing that I found out is that in a critical essay that was trying to debunk the facts and the context and the allegations against not only institutional rigging and favoring of Hillary Clinton, but also machine fraud in a very similar fashion to this 2012 Choquette report that I'm talking about that went against outsiders like Ron Paul and went for insiders like Mitt Romney. This also apparently happened in the Democrat primary against Bernie Sanders and for Hillary Clinton. And so this person writing an essay on Medium said that they went from the motive first or the logic first, sort of like the way that Chomsky tries to debunk 9/11 truth by saying, why would they pick Saudis instead of Iraqis if they were trying to go to war with Iraq? And this is obviously a misrepresentation of the actual logical structure, where you start with the facts. You don't start with your own prima facie logic. You start with the facts as they lay. So this person in trying to start with their logic, said that if this was if this is true, that the primary was being stolen It would be being stolen by the Hillary Clinton people and by the DNC. And if that were the case, then what you would see is that Hillary Clinton would show this advantage in states that had a Democrat governor. But then the exact opposite was the case that they found. That Hillary Clinton showed this advantage, this apparent machine advantage, in states that had Republican governors. And so this person doing the critique basically then says that proves that the whole thing's bunk. I think that's interesting evidence that begins to point towards what a lot of us missed during this election season, that it was not, as we thought, that Donald Trump was the straw man, as even the DNC and their Peter Pan, or what was it called?
I believe it was Pied Piper.
The Pied Piper strategy of putting forth Ben Carson and Ted Cruz and Donald Trump as the best way to elect Hillary Clinton. But it turns out potentially that Hillary Clinton was the straw woman. And you can even see it on 9/11 in New York. She fell over. And she was when looking back on it, she's probably the only person.
Claim to fame was covering that.
What'd you say?
Mike Cernovich's claim to fame was covering that incident, which got him the big 60 Minutes interview, which focused on his coverage of that.
Oh, I didn't know that. That is interesting. And it turns out that Hillary Clinton might have been the only person that could run against Donald Trump that would make it seem a viable concept that Donald Trump won at the end. Then I began to think, okay, there's might be a lot of double meanings here, and the surface is not what you think, and that of course this has to do with what WikiLeaks actually is, and so is WikiLeaks, as Scott Creighton from the Willy Loman blog says, actually just a straight up U.S. intelligence, and then what others from like Veterans Today have said, an Israeli intelligence, basically cleanup operation, a honeypot operation. And so that might put the murder of Seth Rich into a different perspective. But I don't think we have the answers yet, but let's continue to look for them.
Jeremy, you're bringing up a lot of things that honestly I don't think are really getting discussed anywhere else. And you raised a couple of very important points I'd like to elaborate on. First of all, I'd like to say with the Seth Rich, what I think that where I think both of us are coming from here is that we need to be very, very, very careful in how, as critical thinkers, very, very careful in how this is analyzed, and not just to go in with what is perceived to be what the anti-establishment alternative media says, and just it's very careful to actually not only to have a healthy skepticism surrounding this, on one hand, not to dismiss the possibility of this happening, like what the lot of media types are doing by calling this fake news, and they're dismissing, and they're just taking a very aggressively mocking and dismissive tone of the people who are doing the investigating, whether their motives are actually to be trusted or not, doing the investigating into this Seth Rich DNC situation. It's very, on one hand, not dismiss this stuff because of, as you said, the Clintons' very real history of criminality and of what you said, called their body count, and people like the very suspicious events surrounding the deaths of people like Vince Foster. So it's very important on one hand not to dismiss this or to take a condescending or dismissive tone towards what is being alleged by some about what may have happened to Seth Rich, and that the Clintons and the DNC may be closely connected to it. But also at the same time, it's important not just to harbor a healthy skepticism about what you're hearing, but it's also important, much like with Pizzagate, to analyze the possible. And this is where I think that it's important for us to bring it up, because I don't know if anyone else is covering it from this perspective, but it's important to look at what it's being used for. And I see this as twofold. On one hand, I definitely, regardless of whether it's true or not, this is being used to either take attention away from Trump and any wrongdoing affiliated with bad things affiliated with Trump and his presidency, and to downplay anything about Trump and people around him, and to continue to focus on Hillary Clinton and the liberals and the Democrats, continuing to put Hillary Clinton out there as the ultimate boogeyman evil, to continue to justify electing Trump, and also to just take the heat off of him as continuing to throw Clinton out there constantly. That's one way that this is being used by a lot of these right-wing media types, clearly. And also, we need to question if this is being used to deflect from what you were talking about with the election fraud, which I think is quite honestly, I think that it's quite obvious that there's something going on with these elections at the very least, as we've seen in the Bush days, and then some of the irregularities and inconsistencies with the election this year. And of course, we could think what we want within the, September 11th community about people like Greg Palast. But fact is, though, is that his work should be evaluated, and what he's documented about the 2016 election, and some of the things that happened in some of the states that were won by Trump, and in some of the closer states. But is this being done to lead people into a wild goose chase surrounding the Clinton evils and what they may or may not be guilty of, and on things that may or may not be credible, and taking your attention off of things such as very real possibility and likelihood of outright election fraud? Because with Pizzagate, regardless of what is or is not true about Pizzagate, so-called Pizzagate, which may just be a cover for what we call, in a bigger, wider range, pedogate, with the epidemic of blackmailing of politicians and of political figures with scandals related to immoral sexual activity, especially even with underage children. But that was designed to put into a box where, instead of actually really credibly bringing up the evidence that has been accumulated over the years of these trafficking rings, these blackmail operations, of course connected directly to people like Donald Trump's political mentor, Roy Cohn. So of course the right-wing types don't want to talk about that. But instead of focusing on that in general, laying out a case with credibility about there's a history of this, there's a documented track record of these things going on. Instead, you get all the focus around whether or not there was a literal dungeon being, literal sex trafficking ring going on out of a dungeon of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. that the Podestas were closely connected to. And so it's important to harbor a healthy skepticism for reasons like this, and look at how this event and others like it are being used, and what the actual meaning of these events being publicized the way they are is, because it's a very convenient time to be bringing up all this stuff involving Seth Rich and the DNC. And I ask people why. I understand a lot of people that are into like what you may call conspiracy culture at this point are more inclined to have a maybe more right-wing worldview, because I think it's very much been the line that it's coming out from outlets like Infowars, is that clearly the average listener of Alex Jones or of some of these other prominent what you might call conspiracy theory personality, their audiences do have a more right-wing bent. But just because it's the right that's pushing this stuff, you got to question. And I always think back to that old Lenin quote about the best way to control the opposition is to lead it. Much like if you're on the left, and you should have a healthy skepticism and a skepticism and inherent distrust of outlets like Democracy Now! That get a lot of traction on the left. But also with these theories that are coming out from the right, you got to ask yourself, they're getting all this traction, all this coverage, and they're pushing this narrative, which just actually at the end of the day actually benefits the overall continued overall traction of things in the direction that what the quote unquote elites want it to be headed in. And when you see something like Pizzagate coverage or Seth Rich coverage, ask yourself, why wouldn't these same entities that are controlling the left control the right? Is it because you're ideologically in line with what people like Alex Jones and Mike Cernovich and whoever else might say that you're automatically going to trust what they have to say about this stuff. No, I think that we need to look at them just how we would look at these left-wing personalities and media figures that we know are pushing and promoting lies. If you're on the right, you need to look at the people on the right the exact same way, and I don't think there's enough of that going on. So if that could change, I think that would be very beneficial. And you also mentioned WikiLeaks, and it's forbidden to discuss WikiLeaks in a critical context, really, in any side of the aisle outside of the typical establishment types who just who criticize WikiLeaks. But in terms of the alternative media, there's next to no actual real criticism from anyone that has a major platform about WikiLeaks. I mean, Amy Goodman and still champions WikiLeaks' cause, despite the obvious fact that Julian Assange played a major role in getting Donald Trump elected by putting out this information. And you have to ask, who does Julian Assange represent? Is it possible that he's not representing the interests that he claims to represent, but is he representing a deeper, more sinister entity? So I think, and honestly, if I had to make a guess as to who Assange might be representing, it could very well go back to Israeli interests. But when you look at the Clintons and the Pied Piper strategy, and I'm kind of going all over the place here, I know that, but you mentioned the Pied Piper strategy as well and the designated loser idea. When you look at I think that there had to be an understanding amongst much of the political and media establishments that Clinton ultimately was a person who would be very, very difficult to get elected president because of all of the baggage surrounding her and there's been a long, long campaign against the Clintons from the same media sources, the same organizations that were at the forefront of leading the anti-Clinton Clinton crowd as early as the 90s. And Joe Farrow on WorldNet Daily and Christopher Ruddy of Newsmax and various others. Larry Klayman of Judicial Watch has been very heavily involved in a lot of this anti-Clinton stuff over the years. And not that it's not truthful, but there's clearly Clinton is being attacked. The Clintons there's been a long orchestrated campaign to weaken and you might want to say in some ways bring down the Clintons from people representing elements of the political elite and that do not want another Clinton in the White House as president. And you go back to the long, well-documented animosity between Netanyahu and the Clinton family, which of course extends also to Netanyahu and Obama's problems. But Netanyahu and the Israeli government were so distrustful of Bill Clinton and that they installed the Mossad, put cameras into the White House prior to the Monica Lewinsky scandal. It's even widely believed that Monica Lewinsky herself was a Mossad agent. And the Clintons openly worked against Netanyahu in his re-election campaign against Ehud Barak in '99. So there's a long documented history of that Netanyahu and the Clintons aren't exactly friendly to each other. So you get a guy like Trump who is really friendly with the hardcore Zionist elements within the particularly within the American establishment, New York City, which of course, many of his lawyers and these mob figures like Felix Sater, who are not getting talked about in terms of the real potential Russian involvement in the election and with Donald Trump and the people closest to him. So you look at that and that makes you ask, who does WikiLeaks represent? Because it helped get Donald Trump elected clearly. Only put out negative information about the Clintons. And there's been a long animosity towards the Clinton family from the right wing in Israel. And it's the right wing in Israel who Trump happens to be the closest to in terms of the people who have surrounded him his entire life, from Roy Cohn on to his bankruptcy lawyer, David Friedman, to Ronald Lauder, who is representing a more slightly dovish mindset for Trump in terms of the settler arguments and in terms of dealing with the Palestinians, but still comes from a pretty right-wing Israeli viewpoint. So I'm not inserting that WikiLeaks is Israeli intelligence, but I think it seriously has to be asked. That question has to be asked, and it shouldn't be dismissed because in the context of if WikiLeaks and Julian Assange is working for a foreign entity and not straight and narrow with the information it's putting out, I think that the best guess I could make would be the Israelis. I hope that made sense. I talked a lot there. I said a mouthful.
There's a lot of important points there, and just quickly on this WikiLeaks issue, and this relates to this very current context of Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, the relationship of the Arab and Sunni countries in distinction to Iran, and that the leaks that WikiLeaks did that were having to do with the Middle East, they had a very specific effect. They did not expose the Israelis in any deep fashion. What they did was they sort of helped politically lump the Arab leaders together and create a split and escalate the tension, maybe a strategic escalation of tension between the Arab leadership and Iran. And some of those emails had to do with the Arab leaders talking bad, like in a very, just a gossipy type of way, not very deep information, but just sort of a gossipy type of scenario about talking bad about Iran and these types of things. So just on the surface, you can see that Israel has been definitely involved in an aggregation or a coalescing of Sunni and Arab partners to create, and most obviously with Saudi Arabia, to put the threat against Iran and to make a split in the Muslim world between the Sunni sphere and the Shia sphere. So that's just on the surface. Another thing is, I think that you're talking about reminding people that the Clintons were a target of the hardliners in Israel, and this is related to things we've spoken about before, where we made this supposition that Trump in some way represented the first executive, U.S. executive, who the hardline Israelis really considered a full-on asset of theirs. In an unambiguous fashion. Now, how that's turning out, I think, is much more complicated because there's a lot of people with hands in the mix, and
we might know more after next week, but we'll see.
That's a good point, and so it is the case.
We might not know more. We may not know more than
we may know less, yeah, or we may know more about less, or so. The elder Bush did not march to Baghdad during the first Gulf War like the hard right in Israel wanted him to. Clinton apparently is a very different type of president in terms of how many people he's bombing pre-Monica Lewinsky and post-Monica Lewinsky. That's an interesting line of analysis that I'd like to look into more. Then there's this issue of mega. It was exposed that the Israelis had a deep mole inside the White House that they codenamed Mega. And at some point, I think it was during the Clinton administration, there was a question about, do we use Mega to try to get the letter from, I believe, Warren Christopher to the Palestinian leadership at the time. And the word back from the highest levels of Israeli intelligence were, we do not use Mega for something that low level. And it turned out that Mega was, the FBI had ran algorithms that then pointed to Mega being someone who had access or was actually on the National Security Council. Some people have fingered Rahm Emanuel. That seems maybe not quite right, because even as a chief of staff, as Rahm Emanuel was for Bill Clinton, he probably didn't have the actual clearance access for some of the type of stuff that was being passed through Mega to the Israelis. He may have had physical access in a certain way, so that's a possibility. But other people began to finger someone like Richard Clarke, who I believe was actually on the National Security Council and was actually caught at some point in some fashion passing serious secrets to the Israelis. So this Monica Lewinsky targeting of Monica Lewinsky against Bill Clinton, having his predilection for sexual predation was probably widely known amongst all of the intelligence agencies of the world, including the American. But the Israelis definitely knew it, and it looks like they targeted an Israeli asset against Clinton to weaken him and to make him more pliable to do what they wanted to do. And then the other last little piece of that is Linda Tripp, who is widely known as, just some woman who was just, publicized and helped Monica Lewinsky. She was just her confidant. But no, go look into Linda Tripp's background. Even on Wikipedia, you can see, Linda Tripp is deep military intelligence. And does she have connections to, Likud in America? It looks like that might be the case. So that is an analysis that is sort of obvious and needs some unpacking. Last thing in terms of this, I think that your idea, Greg, and your concept of, in terms of some of these very detailed and in-the-weeds types of investigations about where the specifics are very important in terms of coming to a decision about the truth, such as what was titled Pizzagate, and the nature of some of the code language in the DNC emails surrounding the Podestas and their very disturbing choice of art and this language, and then the social media accounts of this pizza shop owner in a neighborhood of DC. In the mix of all of that was it was cloaking this larger, or diverting attention from this much larger problem of the pedophile sexual blackmail networks that are currently still ongoing around the world, apparently, and that there is no difference. It doesn't look like, or there's no separation between parties, Democrats and Republicans, in terms of that activity. And in fact, in the earlier reports around in terms of Nebraska, I forget what the name of that scandal was, but the Boys Town sex trafficking scandal coming out of Nebraska was actually very heavily Republican. But, of course, the Democrats are also, especially at the highest levels, deeply involved in this sick and sadistic behavior. But I think, Greg, your intuition that, whether it's the Rich stuff, the Seth Rich information, where we don't really have access to say one way or the other what the truth is, very different from looking at Building 7 and seeing what the fuck's going on there. Or the Pizzagate stuff, where it's a lot of its context and innuendo. It's very damning, but it's still not clear. That in the case of that, the most important thing that those of us who might see ourselves as political analysts, who are actually trying to help emancipate our understanding, might do, is not to get caught in the weeds necessarily, but also not to negate or try to discourage people who want to go deep into that research, but to really focus on the context, the timing of the releases, the sources of the releases, the signal boosting and the signal shaping of the information, and what it might mean in terms of who is doing what for which purpose. And
Exactly.
Just finishing up, that understanding the nature of propaganda, and I think this becomes even more and more important as we move into the future. Propaganda, you can have black propaganda is based on false information, something like the September 11th official theory. That's black propaganda. It's based on an intelligence legend that's not true. But you can also have gray propaganda, where actually a release of true information, facts that are actually verifiable to be true, but it's being shaped or being inserted from in a very specific direction for reasons of propaganda that are not being disclosed. And so in an era of like people like Roger Stone, who are admitted dark operators, black bag type of operators, you can see that his think about his relationship with former Attorney General of New York, Eliot Spitzer. And I believe it is fully the truth that Eliot Spitzer was caught with a high-end prostitute. And so that Roger Stone can say truthfully, I'm not lying about that. He was caught with a high-end prostitute. But the question becomes, why? What was Roger Stone's role in that? Did he actually help set that up with some of these sort of Israeli-linked sexual trafficking or sexual network, sexual commercial networks in the New York area? And then also was he sicked on Eliot Spitzer to get him out of the way by very specific powers? So that's an important thing to look at. Things may be true, and they still might be propaganda.
Yeah, the Roger Stone thing, back before Alex Jones has officially made, now Roger Stone is officially working for Infowars now. Infowars back in 2008 published an article by Wayne Madsen talking about this exact topic of Roger Stone's involvement in the political takedown of Eliot Spitzer. So these are questions that anybody ever calls into the Alex Jones show when Roger Stone's on there. I know I've been trying to ask them about, bring that topic up and how and why this topic, which was openly published, an article was openly published about on Infowars back in 2008, and ask them about that. So and when I talk about the deeper meaning of this, and I appreciate the compliments, by the way, in terms of discussing some of the potential deeper meanings behind a lot of this stuff. It's very important to understand the meaning of this and the motive, not only the truth of what is being presented, but also the motivations of the people presenting it. Now, I know that you don't dismiss facts because of the people who are promoting it. I mean, the old topic that the old saying my friend Billy used to tell me all the time is that the truth is the truth, even if a notorious liar is the person telling the truth. And I believe that to be 100% true. But in this case, with something like Pizzagate that got so much, the people who made Pizzagate a household word within the alternative community, and the signal boosting they received. I mean, and it didn't have to be this way. And, you got Hillary Clinton calling out Alex Jones by name at her campaign speech, talking about the alt-right and about the dangers of conspiracy theories. And you have Barack Obama addressing Alex Jones by name when he takes a sniff of his arm to ensure that he doesn't have any sort of demon stench on him. as Larry Nichols and others went on the Alex Jones show and asserted. And you got Mike
smells like sulfur. Complete.
Yes. Hillary could not say she's a Christian publicly, according to Larry Nichols. She turned her head around and told him that, I can't do that.
Her head was actually spinning around like the Exorcist.
Yes. Yeah. But Alex gets this promotion. Mike Cernovich, the guy who we talked about, who I think one of his claims to fame was putting out the stories of Hillary Clinton being virtually on her deathbed after she fainted in New York City, gets on 60 Minutes and is made the face of fake news in a long exclusive interview that was done right there on 60 Minutes. The flagship, in some ways, is still the flagship news program of its type in terms of what passes for investigative journalism in the mainstream media. Every Sunday night is still the flagship show in terms of the official establishment media is 60 Minutes, and Cernovich got that platform, and even of course we've talked about the signal boosting of people like Richard Spencer, who aren't necessarily pushing theories about Pizzagate, and Seth Rich, but are also very influential and instrumental in getting a large portion of the population behind Donald Trump and the media coverage he's received. And in this case, when it's especially when it's something that's not so cut and dry, when it's something that is divisive in its nature, such as alleging that there was a literal literal child trafficking dungeon emanating from a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., run by friends of the Podestas and Clintons, which Alex Jones did apologize to James Alefantis, by the way, before he apologized to the Chobani yogurt head for his stories about refugees and Chobani employees being hired committing sexual assaults. So take that.
There was apparently no basement in Comet Ping Pong, but I believe there was a basement in James Alefantis' business a few doors down, a Buck or something, Buck Outdoor Clothing or whatever. So I don't know, but I'm not interested in those weeds.
Yeah, and whether or not it's true though, and how it was used as a divisive topic, and that in that case you've got to, even if everything they're saying is true, we've got to be wondering what these people represent and who they're speaking on behalf of for all the unnecessary signal boosting they've gotten from the they're now just as influential as any of these CNN or New York Times types. And that's one more thing I want to get into before we get into this last topic that I have here with about I think about 12 or so minutes left here, is this. What I think a lot of people don't understand or don't take into consideration when it comes to media and when it comes to the establishment. They automatically perceive someone like Donald Trump as being anti-establishment because of what his surrogates in the media and in other areas constantly claim about him. They portray him as being the ultimate outsider. And as we've talked about in the past, when it comes to the D.C. political establishment, he is an outsider. But we've asserted that he represents another element of elite circles and elite politics that is not commonly thought of or is not commonly addressed when it comes to what is known as the establishment. Well, what is not being taken into consideration is that this movement to get Trump elected, as we talked about in a previous episode where we went into the roots of this current right-wing populism that goes back to not only the John Birch Society, but to Trump's mentor Roy Cohn, who was Joseph McCarthy's lawyer during the 50s, when we had the same level of what you're hearing now about Muslims and Islam taking over was used with communists and people who harbored, far left views back in the 50s that were and so the roots of this movement have gone back a long time. This is not a new movement. This is not something that just popped up overnight organically. This is something that's been a long time in the making, and it's been over the years with the Council for National Policy and other behind-the-scenes organizations, as well as the long orchestrated campaign against the Clintons by people who seem to have close connections to more harder right elements within the Israeli and global Zionist establishments. This is nothing new, and with the age of the internet, what people need to remember is that because of the internet and because of the ability to reach people with the click rather than just 3 television networks like we had back in the in the 50s and 60s, or cable television as recently as 10 years ago, there is more than ever an ability to reach record numbers of people, articles online and with webcast and podcast. And with the rise of the internet and the rise of this right-wing populist movement, which in recent years has come from the Tea Party, and which set the stage for someone like Donald Trump, with the propaganda efforts of a Steve Bannon, with Andrew Breitbart and the media empire, which has developed from there. But with the internet, what we've got now is we have an era where Breitbart and even Infowars are just as influential, just as powerful a media mechanism as CNN or the New York Times. And I think a lot of people, when they talk about the establishment, don't take into consideration that these outlets are just as important or just as influential, have just as much influence over people and over the rhetoric and over the overall tone of our political conversation as the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and CBS do. And these media outlets that have risen within this new right spectrum have been completely legitimized. They have their DC press credentials, which are not going away anytime soon. Breitbart, the Gateway Pundit, and others, Rebel Media, these outlets are just as influential as the aforementioned traditional media, but I think a lot of people don't understand that when they talk about the establishment and the mainstream media, that these outlets, even Infowars, there are now 100% mainstream media. Did you want to add to that before we get into our final topic, or?
Just one statement, that just because a new mass media source is based largely on photons rather than tree pulp doesn't mean that it's not the establishment.
That's very true. That's very true. And this is the new establishment, whether people on the right want to admit it or not, or want to believe it. This is the new establishment. And they're just, as I said, they're just as establishment, just as mainstream as what we consider the traditional liberal media. So remember that. And it gets me to our last topic. We've been talking a lot about the right, and I don't want to just continuously bring up Alex Jones and Infowars, but I got to say, though, just yesterday, I probably listened to about an hour and a half of his show, and I heard some of the worst propaganda I've heard yet from Infowars. And that's saying something, as we've talked a lot about the propaganda that we've heard on this program in recent months, since the rise of Trump mainly. But yesterday was just one of the worst propaganda. There were multiple things that were just very disturbing to me. One of them was, of course, David Horowitz was on the show, and Alex Jones took another opportunity, probably the second or third time, because David Horowitz has written about how the leftists and the Islamists are in alliance with each other. Alex has taken the opportunity to let David Horowitz know that back when he was pursuing the truth about September 11th all those years ago, that he was wrong, and he was not thinking. He was misguided and he was naive back then because he couldn't see the brilliance of someone like David Horowitz in his writings and lectures about how the real conspiracy is not false flag terrorism designed to scapegoat Muslims and justify endless war overseas, and while creating a police state at home. No, the real conspiracy is that the leftists and George Soros are aligning with the radical Islamists to bring down the West and to subject all of us to Sharia law and all of that. And so it's that Mecca rhymes with Mecha mentality that David Horowitz represents, that Alex Jones is now openly praising David Horowitz for. There were a few other things.
It's Mecca. Mecha is foolproof. And just quickly on that point, I just want to say that just the fact alone that that Alex has now had on David Horowitz, multiple times, whereas 10 years ago he was obviously an enemy to Alex's trying to unpack the deception of the war on terror on September 11th, and still Alex has still never had on in the modern era Kevin Barrett, who 10 years ago was helping Alex Jones be part of the 9/11 truth movement that Alex, better or worse, at the very least gave some contribution to. So to me, that's just despicable on Alex Jones's part, that he's not that he's sort of devolved into this reactionary Muslim bashing and left bashing with David Horowitz, and still won't even give a real Muslim American patriot like Kevin Barrett at least a chance to debate.
Exactly, it's so true. And with regards to David Horowitz, there was ever a We Are Change on video confrontation of David Horowitz. I know there was a confrontation of Norman Poteritz. I think it might still be online from Luke and the people at We Are Change. But now, I guess since Norman Poteritz endorsed Donald Trump, even if he was reluctant in doing it, that probably makes him some sort of patriot, according to this crowd. Now, I don't know, but there were a couple other things on this show that were particularly disturbing that I feel the need to point out. And one was Alex had Steve Pieczenik on the program, and Pieczenik is a character that I don't think either of us have quite really been able to figure out exactly what his MO is. He said some strange things that have made me wonder, like thanking James Baker for recommending Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State, and talking about how we need more governments like Brazil's new neoliberal banker-friendly government in Brazil rather than what we have in Venezuela right now. But he was on the show and they were talking about Henry Kissinger, and I have to believe this is primarily because Trump is meeting with Kissinger. There was a full-blown effort from Pizzagate and to a lesser extent Alex to try and rehabilitate Henry Kissinger. As Pizzagate was talking about some of the positive traits that Kissinger has, and even Alex said something about Kissinger compared to the current globalist is nothing. And because Donald Trump is meeting with Kissinger and taking advice from him about Russia and China, now they feel the need to rehabilitate him so the viewers don't ask too many questions about what Trump's doing with someone like Kissinger. And Pizzagate was really hard selling like the why having Kissinger in there to advise Trump is beneficial. And then later on in the show, Roger Stone hosted the Fourth Hour, and he was openly rewriting history to portray Richard Nixon as a man of peace. Say what you want about Richard Nixon and the Watergate and what got him removed from office, but I mean, man of peace is not one of our should not ever be a title that's ever associated with Richard Nixon. I mean, you go back and you look at his actions during the Vietnam War in Cambodia, and you ask the people of Chile whether or not Nixon and Kissinger were men of peace. Of course, the Infowars people probably love Augusto Pinochet. But going on from there, Roger Stone ended the broadcast with the eulogizing of Roger Ailes is a great American patriot, and this man may have been the single most media personality or figure responsible for selling the biggest lies of the so-called war on terror as the head of Fox News. So Infowars continues to reach new lows, and it's getting worse and worse and worse, and it's really high time that people really just stop using Alex Jones and Infowars as a serious source for information, because it's becoming more and more of a full-blown propaganda outlet by the day, turning against everything that it once embraced.
Yes, no matter, I'm open to revisionism, historical revisionism, and that includes about people like Nixon and Kissinger. However, I'm not open to this obsession of apologetics or even hagiography, the idolizing of some of these figures. This represents the American deep state, to better or for worse, and in many and most ways for much worse, in terms of the mass murdering, war criminal aspects. So we need a new, real American politics, a real deep American politics that is first and foremost and fundamentally not based on war criminal apologetics, but based on real principles and the real potentials of we the people's power and the peace that kind of power could create.
Exactly, and if you want a parting thought, just imagine how the alternative media would be reacting to the type of ceremony that took place with the Trump administration in Saudi Arabia today. And I won't get into specifics about that because we're out of time, but just replace Trump with Clinton or anybody else and just see what the reaction would be to some of the events in Saudi Arabia today. So on that note, we're out, and we'll be back with you next time.
Peace.